Okay, good evening everyone, and a warm welcome to those attending and to also our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Environment, Housing and Regeneration Select Committee. My name is Councillor Wayne Bridges and I'm Chairman of this meeting. The key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statements that you will be recorded and made public. For those in the public gallery, you will not be on camera. A reminder to councillors, officers and those speaking today that you should turn your microphone button on when speaking. This will ensure you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. Some quick housekeeping rules before we go on to the agenda. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if one does sound, please follow the officers to the fire exits, out of the building and to the designated meeting point, which is the Civic Centre forecourt. Mobile devices to be switched off or placed on silent. And for residents watching on YouTube or here this evening, you're welcome to give feedback using the feedback forms available in the room and also underneath the broadcast. With that said, we move on to apologies for absence.
Yes, apologies received from Councillor Nicola Brightman.
Thank you very much. Any declaration of interest in matters coming before this meeting? I can see none. Thank you. I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in part 1. Which brings us on to item 4, to agree the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any comments or questions? If not, can I take those, Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. Unless I've missed it, on item 60 on here, forgive me if this has been communicated, but I don't think so. Point 3, about the safety aspect for high street. I'm assuming that isn't, it's outside of our remit, I'm assuming, yeah.
I was going to say that later, but I can say it now. So we looked into it. So it is under the remit of the Public Safety Transport Team, committee, I should say. At the same time, being such a broad subject, officers that I spoke to felt that it really needs to be its own item. So if members were so inclined, they could approach the chairman of that committee and ask for that to be considered as part of their work programme.
Thank you very much. Is that agreed? Thank you. We move on now to item 5, which is the Community Infrastructure Levy Expenditure Monitoring Annual Reports. Welcome to James and Julia this evening. Whenever you're ready, please give your presentation to the members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to give a short presentation and then we're happy to take any questions. So, in my role, I oversee the collection and spend of the Community Infrastructure Levy. So, as the report says, that's a charge on development. It's a fixed charge which should be used to fund general infrastructure improvements required as the result of growth. The report lists on page 8 the types of infrastructure spend, so just at the bottom of page 8 that money can be spent on, so that's education, facilities, transport, healthcare, community care facilities, library services, leisure facilities, open space provision and community facilities. So that is when the money is collected. This report focuses on the Community Infrastructure Levy. I'll refer to it as SIL, just a shorthand, that was collected and spent in the 2021 financial year. I've also attached to the report a copy of the Council's infrastructure funding statement. So that's a statutory document that we have to prepare each year, which looks at both Community Infrastructure Levy and the other type of funding we take from developers to support infrastructure, which is Section 106 planning obligations, which are usually much more site-specific, so they deal with on-site and surrounding site mitigation, whereas the SIL is about more general infrastructure improvements reflecting the population growth that comes with development. And this report just focuses on that, on SIL tonight. On page 8 of the agenda, you'll see that in 2020-2021, we received just over £3.1 million of SIL income. That's Hillingdon SIL, and we spent that same amount. So each year you'll see, as I've shown in the table 1, that the amount received is the amount that we spend each year. And then that SIL is spent in 3 ways. It is spent, 80% of it is spent on those larger infrastructure items. 15% of it, up to 15% of it, is allocated towards the Chrysalis programme and is spent on more local projects. And then 5% is used to fund the team and the system that we use to monitor the spend and collection of SIL. So if you turn to page 9, I listed what we spent that strategic SIL on, and that's in table 2. And what the decision here is corporately is that SIL is matched to items on the capital programme that would be covered by the list of infrastructure that I set out. So in terms of education facilities, we just spent over £1 million on the expansion of Ruislip High School. And then we spent it on structural works, focusing on areas where growth has taken place. So you'll see that's in around Hayes, the Botwell ward, and in centre of Uxbridge. So that's to do with works that have improved roads that are near development sites. And then another large sum, just over nearly 1.2 million, was spent on the preparatory works for West Drayton Leisure Centre. And then a smaller sums have been spent on improvements of some public conveniences in the Botwell ward, which were a result of to address issues of antisocial behaviour. So they were the big strategic SIL items, and then you'll see that a further £450,000 was put towards the Chrysalis programme, and then you'll see detailed in table 3 all of the items that money was then split out against, range of different projects, got access improvements, some refurbishment of community facilities, community safety items, and then some outdoor recreation and town centre improvements. And that process is done. There are bids made through the website from community groups, and then they are allocated out by the cabinet member for environment. So that's the kind of summary of the SIL income and spend. And then I've just given a little update at the end of the report, just to say that we have been investing in improvements in terms of our monitoring and getting a new system in that will make the information around the SIL that we collect and spend more accessible. So we're working towards having a platform that people will be able to access and go in and view. But we implemented that in November of last year, and we're at the moment populating the information onto that system. So the next report that we will bring will be based on that new database, and so we should be able to provide sort of more nuanced information if you've got any particular queries that we can then address. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Julia. Just one point for clarity, which was asked by a member who's not here this evening. On the community safety of page 11 AG, I assume that refers to alligating. Yep, okay. Just wanted that confirmed for anyone watching. Okay, any questions from members? Start with Councillor Gardner, please.
Couple of things. First of all, the loos are in Townfield, not in Botwell. We get quite protective about where our lavatories are. Also, I'm not that good on finances, Mr. Rogers will tell you. Where's the list of where the money has actually come from? You know, like you've got the 106s where the money's come from. Where's the money come from the SIL? Or have I missed something? Which is quite likely.
We haven't provided a list in the report.
Yes, it isn't something the report is basically a reflection of the infrastructure funding statement, and that statutory requirements to identify how we have spent the money and the amounts collected. We wouldn't normally then sort of identify every single development that the money's been collected from.
Can I? The reason for asking that is I actually did go through. It said that what is the proportion of the SIL monies that it's got to come from, say, for argument's sake, a lot of developments in Hayes, but it also says that community will be consulted in terms of where the SIL money is spent, and I'm struggling to find out what communities have been consulted.
So there's differing requirements in terms of the types of SIL. So in terms of the strategic portion, the 80%, that is what is set out in the items for that to be spent on are set out in the infrastructure funding statement, and that's the list given on page 8 and 9, and that usually is a corporate decision, and the decision here is that is allocated to the capital programme. The neighbourhood SIL is the element where in the guidance and the legislation it talks about community involvement, so that is why it's done through the Chrysalis programme, to allow for different community groups to then bid to access the money. So there are different legislative requirements in terms of engagement depending on which SIL pot you're talking about. So that's why in terms of Chrysalis there is a requirement and there is a greater level for community involvement about where that is spent.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, can I do a follow-up on that?
Very quickly.
I'm intrigued about the Chrysalis thing, because I wasn't aware of the fact that the money for the Chrysalis came out of the SIL monies. I mean, that's a new one on me. So I wonder, can we publicise that a bit more? I may have missed it.
I was just going to quickly say, it has done for as long as I can remember. The Chrysalis programme has been funded or part funded via the community infrastructure levy, at least for the past 5 years, if not since 2013, which is how far back we've been. 2014, which is how far back we've been collecting the SIL.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gardner, I know you referred at the beginning of where the funding comes from on certain development projects. I have seen a report somewhere, so I've just mentioned it to Neil. If we could look into outside the meet, if we find it, I'll have it sent to you. Okay. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be grateful if I get a copy of that as well, because it's sort of like having cash cows, in certain parts of the borough. Uxbridge has a lot of developments. South West have had the cinema and Asda and whatnot. So it's good to know what's supplying the pot basically, and then how it's being spent. So that would be good. This may be sort of me being a bit too picky. On page 8, so the second paragraph below the table, so it says, as shown, the council currently spends all the SIL receipts. When you say spend, does that mean that's actually a cash outflow, is it? Or is it an allocation to something?
As I understand it, so yeah, there's an amount spent on the capital programme each year, and then in different funding sources, and SIL is put to that, and so at the end of the year, yes, that money is gone and spent on IT infrastructure, yeah.
So therefore, I just some clarity. On page 10, West Drayton Leisure Centre spend. So what I'm not aware that anything's happened with that. So what's that gone on?
That has gone on all the work to get through, as I understand it, the planning process, get the plans and get ready to build, basically.
That's preparatory costs.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And if I may, Chair, within the actual report itself, so page 23, page 11 of the report. So this is from section 106, but also over the page, on page 25, page 13. It says you're in the process of securing someone to enter data. So this report is the end of the year. Has this been done? Have you actually got somebody in place now? And when did they start?
We have got them in place, and they're starting on the 15th of March. So yes, it is. We have got a purchase order, and they will be starting at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one quick question. You mentioned you were looking at setting up a database or a platform or something. I take it you mean a publicly accessible database in the same way that planning applications are. Is that what you mean?
It can do that. At the moment, it will be internal while we're populating it, and then a decision will be made. But it does have a public-facing platform.
Yeah. So it might not be that developed at the moment, but potentially it could be just the same as the planning portal.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions from members? I can see none. Okay, in which case, thank you very much to Julia and James for your presentation this evening. Thank you very much. You may leave if you wish to do so. Okay, item 6 is our information item on empty properties, pages 33 to 44. And warm welcome to the officers this evening giving their presentations. So whenever you're ready, please begin, and that'll be followed by questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to run through and highlight one or two of the key bits from the report, and then we'll open for questions as before. So first of all, this report I think kind of was born out of when we were going through the housing strategy development process, and this committee highlighted a bit of a lack of information around empty properties. So we included something in the housing strategy as a result of that to basically review our process in relation to empty properties as one of the sort of actions in that strategy, and we're kind of at the sort of beginning stages really of doing that. So I mean, clearly empty properties are a kind of wasted resource essentially, and can provide useful homes for people, so the more we're able to tackle that, the better. And they can also attract all sorts of other kind of problems in neighbourhoods. So certainly sort of addressing that issue is something that we need to take seriously. The first part of this report basically runs through just some of the kind of numbers in relation to empty homes, and also talks about the kind of possibilities for council tax charging in relation to empty properties. And that's essentially that after a property has been empty for 2 years, we have the power to charge an extra 100% on the property. If it's been empty for 5 years or more, you can charge an extra 200%, and if it's empty for 10 years or more, you can charge an extra 300%. At the moment, Hillingdon doesn't charge the maximum in terms of council tax. We basically apply an extra 50% for any properties that have been empty for 2 years or more, and that also applies to those for 5 years or more or 10 years or more. Across London, across the sort of neighbouring West London boroughs, Hounslow operates the same type of policy as Hillingdon, whereas actually all of the others at the moment do charge that maximum. And I'd have to, under the new sort of levelling up paper, there's a proposal in there to reduce the time scale for the first 100% from 2 years down to 1 year, so it may be that we can bring that in earlier in future as well. There wouldn't be huge numbers of properties that would fall within those brackets, so if we were to look at increasing that, it's not likely to make a huge difference to the council's revenues, but what it may do is provide extra incentives around the owners of individual properties to bring them back into use. The sort of numbers of empty properties highlighted there in Table 2. So in Hillingdon at the moment we've got around 935 empty properties. About 176 of those have been empty since before the beginning of 2020. So there are ones that are in that really kind of long-term bracket at the moment. And I've then gone on to talk a bit about second homes and Airbnb properties, because they're another form, if you like, of properties that are not being used for sort of primary residential use, and to some extent fall within the same sort of categories. And in fact, I should mention in relation to second homes, there is a kind of play-off between the council tax issue and second homes, because certainly in some instances people will use the second homes criteria so that they kind of get out of having to pay additional council tax on empty properties. So that wouldn't apply as much in Hillingdon as it does in some other areas. So you need to kind of balance out the need to put pressure on, get extra revenue against the fact that actually your ability to collect the correct information is more compromised as you increase the charges. So second homes you'll see there on Table 3, Hillingdon's numbers about 1,202, considerably higher than most of the West London boroughs. I think the only ones that are higher are Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington, which obviously are both more central. And I'm guessing that the main kind of reason behind that is because of having Hillingdon Airport in the borough. but certainly our position is an outlier compared to the other West London boroughs. Airbnb, something that's been growing in popularity over the years. I think it's kind of rolled back a little bit because of COVID, but still currently showing quite, fairly significant numbers of Airbnbs in the borough. It's difficult to get hold of precise information for all of them, because Airbnb is not the only website that does this. There are some others, although Airbnb is the largest. And certainly from what we've seen, it looks like there's around about 200 sort of whole houses rented out as part of Airbnb, and then a number of others where they're just renting out rooms. Gone there to sort of talk about some of the kind of issues associated with empty homes and negative impacts on the neighbourhoods, and then the types of actions that are taken to address empty properties. I think in terms of enforcement action on empties, there's a number of pieces of legislation that can be used, including things like compulsory purchase orders and empty dwelling management orders. And I think probably the key thing to say about those is that there are none of those sort of remedies that are easy, if you like. All of them involve considerable amounts of work. They involve considerable amounts of staff time, and a considerable time in the kind of processing of action that you take as well. And I think because of that, and for sort of other reasons as well, most councils tend to adopt an approach where they're looking to tackle empties through non-statutory means, through negotiating with owners, looking at how we can work with them to bring properties back into use, and taking that type of approach, certainly in the first instance, and really using that as the main part of your action in relation to empty properties. I've listed under 22 some sort of bullet points around things that the benefits of bringing empty homes back into use, and over the page on point 25 really gets into just some of the activities that other authorities take in relation to empty properties. And I think where we are now really is looking to kind of just review the action that we take currently, look at whether there are elements of a kind of more strategic approach that we need to take in relation to empty homes. And crucially, I think looking at costing out how effective different measures are likely to be in relation to the sort of level of resource that's needed to go into them. And I think the intention is that we kind of do that work over the next few months and essentially come up with some sort of recommendations later in the year to develop our kind of strategic approach on empty homes.
Thank you very much, Debbie. I'll invite questions from members, and before I do, I would just politely remind members that we're here to discuss the policy and the framework overall, not individual cases street by street, so please just bear that in mind when we go to the questions. If I could just begin with Debbie though, on page 34 you did make reference to the empty 10-year premium of 300%, but on page 33 it mentioned 400%. Which one is correct, just for clarity?
So the 300 is the additional premium that you can charge, so it would be 400 in total.
Thank you very much. Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. It's an interesting read through, and thank you for the presentation. I have some questions in terms of the split. So you've got this 935 number. Is this all private dwellings, or is this a mixture of council and private? I wasn't clear on that. So then turning over to page 36, item 15, I was curious with that in terms of what the average turnaround time is, what the size of properties, is it a mix, so is it a particular type of property that takes longer, or that we, for some reason, we're not able to get people in? and sort of what's the sort of length of time that's unoccupied in terms of what's the longest we've got something that's not been filled by someone on council properties. And then finally, for this moment, is on item 20, page 37. I found this quite an interesting area. So you've got 985 properties. These are all private, I believe, and it was found that 418 of them were occupied and therefore liable for council tax. I was wondering whereabouts, this cost the borough, and also wondering whether not all the council tax has been recovered for those properties. Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, I think the 935 is all tenures. The information in relation to council properties and the turnaround within our own stock, it's not something that I've looked at the data for in relation to this report, although I'm sure there's quite a lot of information on our own council voids available. So we can...
Through the Chairman, we can provide further information on that.
And sorry, which was the final bit that we were looking at?
20.
Page 37, item number 20, or paragraph 20.
We would probably have to take that back to council tax and get a response view on that to see what the collection rate was after those properties were identified.
Neil, you happy to note that as an action point? Yeah. I have Councillor Kaufman next. If you don't have a follow-up, Councillor Foley. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Chairman, and excuse me. Thank you, Debbie, for a really, really good report. It's readable and understandable. 98% anyway. The question I was going to ask was the fact that if you've got all these void properties, wouldn't it be sensible to actually look at them and get them up to scratch so that they can actually be let? So we hear about all these people that haven't got places to go to, and yet we've got voids in disrepair or whatever, or needing repair. And if we had sort of half of those ready to go, wouldn't that help the sort of homeless or increase our housing stock?
If I can pick that one up, I mean, you're absolutely right, and we are improving a number of properties to bring them back into use. Some of the properties which are long-term empty that are within the local authorities' housing stock, some of them have been subject to fire damage and then can lead to complicated insurance claims and so on and so on. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we want a few void properties as possible, really, and so we're focusing on reducing the number of voids and the average length of time that it takes to relet them. And I'm pleased to report that is coming down, and it continues to come down.
Councillor Gardner?
A couple of things. Regarding the second homes, I imagine some of them are the foreign investors that are investing in some of the flats well, I know for a fact in Hayes, some of the big developments, there are properties empty because investors have bought great big tranches of them. Is that correct? And also, do we still have an empty homes officer? Not a named officer that we used to have.
Use the microphone, please, if you answer.
Apologies. The investors question, I don't know with any certainty around how much of an issue that is in Hayes. I mean, what you say makes sense, and certainly I've seen reports around empty homes across London as a whole, and particularly those kind of central areas where there's lots of investment, where the investor issue does cause some massive problems around empty properties. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if that wasn't the case here as well, at least to some extent. I've forgotten what the... Oh yes, the empty homes officer. No, we haven't got a specific officer whose job is focused purely on empty homes at the moment. Empty homes generally falls under the private sector housing team, although there are other parts of the council that get involved in some bits around it as well. So, for instance, that work that was referenced around fraud and antisocial behaviour, but it sits with the private sector housing team in general.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, thanks for the excellent report. I found it very, very illuminating, actually. I was fascinated by this business of the second homes and what to me is an enormous number here, which, again, we were discussing it earlier, and the only reason we could imagine is Heathrow. I was wondering, do second homes attract a premium or a discount in terms of council tax? And if they don't actually in Hillingdon, is there legislation allowing for such a premium or discount?
I think it certainly used to be the case that you could get a discount
That's what I
on
thought,
second
yes.
homes.
Sorry.
I'm trying to remember whether you still can or not, but I'm fairly sure that Hillingdon doesn't give a discount, regardless of whether you can still get one or not. I don't think we're allowed to charge a premium at the moment. Is that right?
I think so.
I think it is, isn't it?
Thank you. Can I have one follow-up question, if you don't mind, Chairman? We would, again, sorry, I should explain myself and the Chairman in the same ward. We're aware of 3, 4, maybe 5 empty homes. Looking on your wonderful map, there's about 20, 24 sort of thing, depending on where the middle of the circle is, so to speak. Is it possible to have a list of them by ward?
We'd probably have to just check what the GDPR requirements are for that, and then we can come back and confirm, confirm that or not.
I've got no intention of publicising it and pointing things out, but I would be curious, because the ones we're aware of it because the gardens are badly maintained, this sort of thing. So there's a perennial issue of getting ASB to go and not that ASB cut the lawns, but ASB get somebody in to cut the lawns, this sort of thing. So I'd be interested to see what the full portfolio is, so to speak, and see how they're maintained and whether there's any issues with them.
Yeah, it's information from our council tax colleagues. So basically, we'll check with them around what we're allowed to do with it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. My understanding under GDPR, as members of the council, we are the authority, so we would be entitled as elected members to see that list. So if you could go back to officers, maybe consult the borough solicitor in terms of the GDPR regulations, but if that is the case, it would be beneficial to distribute that to all members of the council, because I'm sure they'd all be very interested to know what's happening in their ward. Sorry, was there any other... Councillor Farley, you did, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I think I touched upon it, but I didn't get some. I just want to get some further clarity on it. So the number that we got in the 935. What kind of properties are we talking about? Because we have surgeries or emails from residents. We're looking for 3, 4 bedroom houses. What sort of denomination? What kind of numbers are we talking about that are 4 bedrooms or 1 bedroom flats or bed sits, or what are the sort of breakdown? Do we have that kind of information?
I certainly haven't got that information to hand. I'm not sure, to be honest, how easy it is to get at that. I suspect it probably isn't very easy to get at it, but I will. I'll talk to council tax and see what they say about that.
Okay, if I may, Chair, thank. Just almost to clarify, point 6 on page 34. So Hillingdon charges a 50% premium compared to, apart from Hounslow, or charging the 100%. Why is it that we're charging a lower amount? If this is sort of like a prompt to get people to bring their houses into use and get people in there, and get people into houses. What's the reasoning behind why we are only doing 50%?
If I could sort of jump in there, I mean, it's obviously it's an administration policy, and we would obviously need to take a view in the future on what charge would need to be levied.
Thank you, Councillor Farley, for nicking my question on that, because that was actually my understanding. It was an administration policy, I assume, but to me, if your property is over 10 years old and empty, I don't know why we're not charging the maximum amount possible. And it's a shame that this is an information item rather than a full review, because that's probably one of the recommendations we would push for as a committee. But I wouldn't like to just this to be a one-off. If I know there's elections in May, but afterwards perhaps if the clerk could refer this item to the new chairman and the committee as a potential subject for future major review, I think it might be a good issue to look at. Any other questions from members? Councillor DeVille?
Yeah, just one. When you said you found 418 properties identified, what about the rest? What are they? On page 37.
So the remainder of them would still be actually unoccupied properties. So it's work that our fraud team looked at to look at some of those empties and see whether some of them were actually occupied and some of them were.
Okay, would there be no other further questions from members? Thank you very much, a very well-informed report, and our thanks to the officers who put that together. It's very much appreciated. We'll move on to our next item. If you wish to leave, feel free to do so. I don't think we'll be much longer behind you, to be honest, but we'll, Item 7 is our Cabinet Forward Plan. Comments or questions, please, from members? If not, are we happy to note? Yep, okay. The work programme, again, happy to note. Neil mentioned earlier during the minutes about the change for the... Yep, okay. Right, in that case, we are done, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your attendance this evening. That concludes our business, and the meeting is now closed at, I can't see the time, what is it? 19:36. Thank you very much, everyone. Good night.